Gandhi's Passion, The Life and Legacy of Mahatma Gandhi by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 3, The Impact of Victorian London. His vegetarianism was rooted in the Hindu reverence for cows. Much later, when asked to define Hinduism, Gandhi said that it was cow worship. He called the cow a poem of pity, and as did all devout Hindus, considered it divine. His delight in finding a whole society of British allies in protecting cows can hardly be exaggerated. In London, Gandhi remained in daily touch with his vegetarian friends, as ardent as an advocate of the salubrious values as well as religious virtues of their faith as any among them. In 1891, when he moved to 52nd Street, Stephen's Garden, Bayswater, Gandhi started a new local branch of the Vegetarian Society, serving as its secretary. His friend and roommate, Dr. Josiah Oldfield, editor of The Vegetarian, agreed to preside over all the meetings of their West London Food Reform Society. Good Christian that Dr. Oldfield was, he tried to convert his young Indian friend to the Anglican faith, urging him to read the Bible. Gandhi found the Old Testament much less appealing than the New, attracted on first reading to the Sermon on the Mount, which went straight to my heart. He thus received scriptural validation for nonviolence from Christian sources, even before reading much about it in India's literature. Two vegetarian bachelor brothers who had been studying the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, Song of the Blessed Ones, using Edwin Arnold's poetic rendition, the Song Celestial, invited Gandhi to read and translate the original Sanskrit version of that epic poem with them. Edwin Arnold would later agree to serve as vice president of Gandhi's Bayswater Food Reform Society, and Mohan found his Light of Asia, a life of the Buddha, just as compelling as his work on the Gita. The unnamed bachelor brothers were both theosophists, and they tried to convert Gandhi to that esoteric sect. At one point, they brought him to Blavatsky's lodge in London, where he met the mysterious founder of Theosophy, Madame Helena Blavatsky, then mortally ill. Her key to Theosophy, Gandhi recalled, stimulated in me the desire to read books on Hinduism and disabused me of the notion fostered by the missionaries that Hinduism was rife with superstition. At London's Theosophical Society, he first met Madame's recent convert, her most brilliant disciple, Annie Besant. Annie had gained notoriety long before meeting Madame Blavatsky as atheist radical Charles Bradlaugh's lover, helping him lift a ban imposed on a book advocating birth control, leading the first women's strike of matchmakers in London, joining George Bernard Shaw's Fabian Socialist Society, and campaigning as vigorously for Irish Home Rule as she later would for Indian Home Rule. She was to be the first woman and the only English woman ever elected to preside over India's National Congress. Annie tried her eloquent best to lure Mohandas into theosophy, as she would later convert Motilal Nehru and his only son Jawaharlal. But Gandhi remained impervious to all her allures, as he was to Dr. Oldfield's attempts to bring him up to Christ. It was only after I came in contact with Christians that I resolved I should be termed a Hindu, he later reflected. Shamed by his newfound theosophist friends into studying the Gita, Gandhi viewed it through the lens of his prior reading of the Sermon on the Mount, resolving to try to reconcile Hinduism's misnamed New Testament with the message of his favorite Christian sermon. A singular challenge. He read again Hindu Lord Krishna's teaching to the noble warrior Arjuna, who lost courage facing his own guru and cousins just before an epic battle. Krishna instructed Arjuna to fight and kill without fear or malice, dispassionately as a true warrior's sacred caste duty. The Gita's key message of disinterested action, karma yoga, was most effectively used by revolutionary nationalists like Bal Gangadhar Tilak to provide ideological validation to young Indian assassins who later gunned down or bombed British officials, even as it helped to inspire Gandhi's own assassin, Nathuram Godse. Krishna was the most popular earthly emanation of Lord Vishnu, Hinduism's powerful solar divinity. Gandhi's amazingly imaginative reading of the Gita, which allowed his syncretic mind to reconcile its potent advocacy of violence with Jesus' message to turn one's other cheek to, whomsoever shall smite thee, was to argue that the epic Mahabharata's field of battle around Old Delhi was really a struggle between good and evil in the field of man's soul. Rather than convert himself to the idealistic Christian faith he loved and admired, to which his sensitive spirit so strongly resonated, Gandhi thus tried to reinterpret Hinduism's most famous philosophic justification for murder into a paean of Christian passivity. Like ancient Hindu logicians, he sought to reconcile opposites and hoped by the sweet optimism of his analysis to disarm his staunchest opponents, whether British, Muslim, or Hindu. Ironically, his method was to prove most effective against Christians and least acceptable to a fanatical fringe of Brahmins of his own faith. While remaining staunchly Hindu at heart, young Mohandas transformed himself during his years in London into a proper English gentleman. He bought his evening clothes on Bond Street, wore a chimney pot hat and winged collars whenever he dined out, and taught himself the art of knotting his black bow tie. I wasted 10 minutes every day before a huge mirror, arranging my tie and parting my hair. He paid for private lessons in dancing, French, elocution, and violin. He quickly abandoned the violin, though he had purchased one, and gave up dancing classes as well, finding it impossible to keep time. 2 months after reaching London, Gandhi paid his fees and enrolled to begin his legal education at London's Inner Temple, the most expensive as well as the largest of London's 4 ancient Inns of Court. The major prerequisite for becoming a barrister at this time was keeping terms by paying for and attending, not necessarily eating, at least 6 dinners per term in the temple's grand dining hall. There were 4 terms per year, and each aspiring barrister was obliged to remain in London no less than 3 years, and was required to be at least 21 years old when called to the bar. Written tests in Roman law and the English common law as well as equity also had to be passed. I could not see then, nor have I seen since, Gandhi reflected 3 decades later, how these dinners qualified the students better for the bar. There was once a time when only a few students used to attend these dinners, and thus there were opportunities for talks between them and the benchers, and speeches were also made. No such thing was possible in my time. Hundreds of students would fill the hall's floor, 4 at a table, with black-robed barristers who presided over the inn. benchers seated at their own raised high table in splendid isolation. Though, as Gandhi concluded, the institution of keeping terms had lost all its meaning, conservative England retained its nevertheless. English barristers were jokingly referred to as dinner barristers. Wealthy Indian families like the Gandhis, Jinnahs, and Nehrus were eager to send their brightest young men to dine in London's Inns of Court, set amid lovely garden grounds north of the Thames embankment. There they breathed the sweet air of liberty, imbibing such revolutionary concepts of the common law as the presumption of innocence and the freedom to express one's ideas and opinions in speech or writing, whatever one's color, creed, or caste might be. Those London inns, the inner temple for Gandhi and Nehru, Lincoln's Inn for Jinnah, proved inadvertent cradles to the nationalist leadership of India and Pakistan, educating those brilliant barristers to voice English demands for justice and teaching them most effectively to speak, petition, and act in rallying millions of their followers to demand freedom. Like most Indian students in London, Gandhi never spoke of his wife or son. Harilal had been born a few months before he left home. To any of the English friends, he felt ashamed of having married so young and pretended instead to bachelorhood. Another reason for dissembling, he confessed, was that for married students it would be impossible to flirt with the young girls of the family in which they live. Mohandas obviously saw that our youths had succumbed to the temptation and chosen a life of untruth for the sake of companionship. I too caught the contagion, but he never took advantage of any English women he met, though several seemed quite interested in penetrating his armor of shyness, tempting him to break at least one of the sacred vows he had made to his mother. He generally met with temptation on short holidays at watering places like Winter and Brighton. In his hotel dining room at the seaside resort, he met an old widow who kindly helped him read the French menu. Their acquaintance ripened into friendship, and soon he dined at her London home every Sunday. To help him conquer my bashfulness, the old lady invited young ladies to join them. She seemed to have thought of an engagement between Gandhi and one of them, he recalled, much to his dismay at not having earlier mentioned his wife and child. Too embarrassed to speak of it, he wrote her a letter confessing his falsehood. I have been unworthy of your affection, but I am glad. God has now given me the courage to speak out the truth. Will you forgive me? I assure you I have taken no improper liberties with the young women. Both ladies enjoyed a hearty laugh over his chagrin and apology, urging him to return for Sunday dinner whenever he wished. At a vegetarian conference in Portsmouth late in 1890, Gandhi met another young English woman with whom he played a rubber of bridge in a boarding house which he describes as one containing women of ill fame, not actually prostitutes but at the same time not very scrupulous about their morals. Just when I was about to go beyond the limit, leaving the cards and the game, God, through the good companion at bridge, uttered the blessed warning, "Whence this devil in you, my boy? Be off, quick." I took the warning, remembering the vow I had taken before my mother. I fled from the scene. To my room, I went quaking, trembling, and with beating heart. The first occasion on which a woman other than my wife moved me to lust. I passed that night sleeplessly. By the start of the third year in London, Gandhi had grown so interested in Christianity's good works that he took a visiting Indian poet, Nayan Hemchandra with him to meet Cardinal Henry Edward Manning, whose personal intervention had been instrumental in settling the crippling London dock strike of 1889. Manning, then over 80, greeted the young visitors at his residence. "I do not want to take up your time," Gandhi told him. "I had heard a lot about you and I felt I should come and thank you for the good work you have done for the strikers." "I am glad you have come," the cardinal replied. "I hope your stay in London will agree with you. God bless you." Perhaps it was Manning's energetic example of strike intervention that inspired Gandhi later to take such pains in resolving a number of important labor disputes and helping to organize India's first trade unions. Personal contacts with such socially conscious leading Christians, at any rate, helped him to appreciate their commitment to Britain's impoverished workers and may have contributed to the evolution of, if not directly inspiring, Gandhian socialism, which he named Sarvodaya, the uplift of all. Perhaps the greatest gulf between Gandhi and Nehru was to emerge over different forms of social action that appealed most powerfully to each man. Gandhi is inspired by early Christian and ancient rural Hindu ideals of love and communal sharing. Nehru's by Marxist-Leninist concepts of inevitable class conflict and violence, leading to victory by the proletariat. During his last years in London, Gandhi also met industrialist Arnold Hills, whose editorials in The Vegetarian had inspired him to appreciate the Christian spiritual connections of their common faith in vegetarianism. Hills, like William Morris, Edward Carpenter, and John Ruskin, was a vigorous Victorian critic of the monstrous horrors of modernity's urban industrial pollution and human degeneration. His work and words inspired Gandhi to seek a simpler, more truthful ethos for India and all of humankind. When he who is impure has learned to loathe the sensual sins which war against the soul, when he has learned to love that heavenly chastity which is a sign and seal of God's abiding presence, wrote Hills, then for him the process of salvation is begun, for in the body he has begun to know God. Gandhi's life in London, remote from the carnal temptations of his wife and bound by the threefold abstinence demanded by his mother, was in many ways more nearly like that of a Christian monk than the Hindu husband and father he was. By leaving for London, he had thus left the second householder Grihastha stage of a traditional Hindu's ideal four-staged life, returning instead to stage 1, Brahmacharya, celibate studenthood. Apprentice barrister Gandhi appears to have found celibacy much more congenial to his shy, sensitive personality and spirit than the life of lust thrust upon him perforce by his very early arranged marriage. With no conjugal distractions or obligations, young Mohandas decided to take required courses and examinations to qualify as a matriculate from London University while completing his final term for the bar. He studied Latin and chemistry in addition to French and physics, heat and light. Though he first failed both examinations in Latin and chemistry, he did not lose heart, resolving to try again, passing the Latin at second try, taking physics instead of chemistry to fulfill the science requirement. On the eve of his departure for home in 1891, Gandhi was interviewed by a vegetarian reporter who asked what had induced him to come so far. In a word, ambition, he replied. Ambition to become a barrister was his youthful incentive. Yet, once he arrived in the imperial capital of so many inns of courts, Built around their temple of justice, he embarked upon an eager spiritual search for deeper understanding, stimulated by London's plethora of sects and spires, temples of parliament, and parliaments of religion, all challenging him to question every axiom of his faith. Ambition may have lured him to London, but self awareness sustained him there. Every day in that capital of the world, he was stimulated to learn more about faith and philosophy as well as the law, about India and Mohandas Gandhi, as well as Great Britain and the roots of British power. On June 12, 1891, the day after he was admitted to the bar, Gandhi left London and started his passage back to Bombay. At Liverpool Street Station, he took the express train to Southampton's docks, but I could not make myself believe that I was going to India until I stepped into P&O steamship Oceana. In less than 3 years, he had grown so much attached to London and its environment. He confessed to his vegetarian friends. Who would not be? London, with its teaching institutions, public galleries, museums, theatres, vast commerce, public parks, and vegetarian restaurants, is a fit place for a student and a traveller, a trader and a fadist, as a vegetarian would be called by his opponents. The first part of his voyage home was luxurious. The more than 6,000-ton Oceana seemed a vast floating island to Barrister Gandhi, who relished his gratis tea and enjoyed a rich variety of vegetarian food on board, from vegetable curry and rice to fresh fruit and brown bread brought down from the first-class salon to Gandhi's second-class cabin by a kind and obliging steward. After reaching the Red Sea, however, temperatures rose so high that for the first time we felt we were going to India. And at Aden, he and the other Bombay passengers were obliged to transfer to a smaller old boat named Assam. It was like leaving London for a miserable village, he recalled. Misfortunes never come single. With the Assam, we had a stormy ocean because it was the monsoon. Many were sick. If I ventured out on the deck, I was splashed. In the cabin, you cannot sleep. Your bags begin to dance. You roll in your bed. Thus tossed up and down, we reached Bombay on 5th July. It was raining very hard. How hopeful, yet how often disappointed is the human mind. Chapter 4, Brief Interlude at Home. Brother Lakshmidas welcomed him on the rain-drenched dock in Bombay and drove him to Dr. P.J. Mehta's grand house, where they spent the night. Mohan first learned now of his frail mother's last illness and recent death. He stoically accepted the sad news, shedding no tears, taking to life just as though nothing had happened. His wife and son had remained in Rajkot, but before returning to them, Gandhi accompanied his elder brother on a purification pilgrimage to Hindu city of Nasik, where he washed away his pollution acquired from crossing dark waters in the mud-yellow meandering streams of the temple-lined Dharna river. The Modhvanya caste council had ordered Lakshmidas to take his excommunicated rebel sibling to Nasik for a ritual bath as the first step towards his readmission to their caste. He would also be required to host a feast for all the Vanya elders of Rajkot, each of whom Barrister Gandhi was obliged personally to serve bare-chested, except for his sacred thread, bowing low as he humbly begged forgiveness. Finally, there was a rather exorbitant fine he was expected to pay. Mohandas reluctantly accepted the first two conditions but refused point blank to pay any fine. His refusal left him excommunicated in Port Bandar, where Kasturba's entire family resided. He would never again step inside the grand homes of any of his wealthy in laws in their Arabian seaside city. I would not so much as drink water at their houses. They were prepared secretly to evade the prohibition, but it went against the grain with me. Kasturba's reaction to her stubborn husband's adamant refusal ever again to enter her father and mother's home, or that of her sister or brother, may well be imagined, though no mention is made of it by Gandhi. She had, after all, been deprived for almost 3 years of her husband's supportive presence and love, left under his mother's protection in his brother's home with her infant son, who had barely glimpsed his father's face. No sooner was Gandhi reunited with his wife, moreover, than clouds of lust and jealousy began again to darken their days and night. Even my stay in England had not cured me of jealousy. He was suspicious of Kasturba's every excursion out of his sight. Sheikh Mehtab continued to do his insidious worst to exasperate such foolish, baseless fears, but Mohandas was as yet still more of a passionate young husband than a Mahatma. Once I went the length of sending her away to her father's house, thus excommunicating her much as her father's caste had done to him. He took her back only after I had made her thoroughly miserable. Much later, he could dispassionately appreciate that sad event as pure folly on my part. The self righteous barrister now resolved to reform his illiterate wife and son, as well as his brother's children, who all shared the same large house, into literate reflections of Victorian London. He tried to teach Kasturba English and insisted that the children do regular daily physical exercise to make them hardy. He also taught them to dress like Englishmen and to use Western utensils at the dinner table, where tea and coffee were banished, replaced under his ever watchful eye by cocoa and oatmeal porridge. He even introduced English shoes and European dress, all of which proved expensive and painfully frustrating. Friends, doubtless including his poor wife and puzzled brothers, advised me to go to Bombay for some time. His exotic experiences and studies in London obviously made him too grand and exalted a barrister for backward little Rajkot. Bombay had its own high court, moreover, so the friends suggested he should try to get briefs there. For despite his own high opinion of himself, he was slow to win gainful legal employment of any kind at Rajkot. Bombay failed, however, to offer him any more lucrative opportunities to use his costly British title of Bart at law. Though he walked daily from the flat he found in Gaum to the High Court, vainly waiting with other briefless barristers in the crowded corridors of legal power, hoping to be tapped by some litigant in need of representation. I found the barrister's profession a bad job, he reflected. Much show and little knowledge. He learned from colleagues that it was not unusual for a new barrister to vegetate up to 7 years before earning enough of a reputation to support himself. His brother, who had invested a small fortune in funding him abroad, now tried his best to help Mohandas get briefs. Gandhi felt as fearful and helpless, he oddly confessed, as the bride come fresh to her father-in-law's house. And when at last he actually stood up in small cause's court, my heart sank into my boots. He could not think of a question to ask and feared that the judge was secretly laughing at him. Ashamed of his impotence, Gandhi left the court, turning the case and its fee over to a Mr. Patel, for whom it was a child's play. Unlike Jinnah, who would soon rocket to the top of Bombay's bar by his unflappable courtroom presence and rhetorical brilliance, Gandhi proved himself an utter failure at the profession his brother had chosen for him. He was a prophetic failure, however, which compelled him to move on, conquer other worlds, and answer other callings.